Okay, picture this. You've just stumbled upon the absolute ultimate truth of the universe, the big secret to ending all suffering. What do? Do you shout it from the rooftops, or do you keep it locked away entirely to yourself? Well, let's dive into this fascinating dilemma. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are exploring the Lohicca Sutta. This is an ancient Buddhist text from the Dīgha Nikāya, and it tackles a profoundly deep question about knowledge, duty, and honestly, selfishness. It's this remarkable dialogue that really forces us to look at our own relationship with the things we learn and the wisdom we accumulate. So our story centers around a very wealthy Brahmin named Lohicca. And Lohicca develops what the text actually calls an evil viewpoint. He thinks to himself, suppose that a Brahmin or contemplative were to arrive at a skillful doctrine. Having arrived at a skillful doctrine, he should not declare it to anyone else. For what can one person do for another? He basically argues that teaching someone else is like cutting an old bond just to make a new one. It's just a messy entanglement. He even goes so far as to call sharing this knowledge an evil, greedy deed. I really want you to consider that for a second. Is keeping the ultimate truth to yourself a sign of supreme detachment and wisdom, or is it incredibly, deeply selfish? To answer that, we're going to follow the Buddha's masterful response. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the danger of hoarding knowledge, then break down the logic of sharing, look at 3 types of flawed teachers, trace the actual path to awakening, and finally, look at achieving ultimate release. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The danger of hoarding knowledge.
Our explainer kicks off in the town of Lohicca. Lohicca invites the Buddha over for a meal, while secretly harboring this highly cynical philosophy about keeping knowledge to himself. But after the meal, the Buddha confronts him. And this is where we see the Buddha's absolute brilliance as a teacher. He uses a Socratic method. He doesn't just lecture Lohicca, he asks questions to guide him to his own realization. The Buddha asks Lohicca, who basically reigns over this town, what it would mean if someone said Lohicca should just consume all the fruits and revenues of the town completely by himself, without sharing a single thing with his subjects. Would that make him a creator of obstacles for his people? Lohicca admits, yeah, absolutely it would. The Buddha then directly connects the dots, comparing this hoarding of physical, regional wealth to the hoarding of spiritual wealth. Which brings us to part 2, the logic of sharing. Having established that hoarding physical wealth hurts people, the Buddha logically dismantles Lohicca's selfish argument piece by piece. It's this brilliant if-then progression. He explains that if you hold on to a liberating truth, you are effectively creating obstacles for others who could genuinely benefit from it. And by creating obstacles, you're showing a complete lack of sympathy for their welfare. When you lack sympathy, your mind becomes established in animosity rather than goodwill. And a mind rooted in animosity? Well, that's operating under a wrong view. According to the text, the Buddha tells Lohicca that clinging to this wrong view literally dooms the teacher to a terrible destination, either hell or the animal womb. The logic here is airtight. Refusing to share the truth isn't some noble detachment. It's an active harm. Moving on to part 3, 3 types of flawed teachers. But this brings up a really crucial question. If we are ethically obligated to share knowledge, who is actually qualified to step up and teach it? Does just anyone have the right to claim they hold the truth? Well, the Buddha categorizes those who fail as teachers into 3 specific types. And in all 3 cases, he uses Lohicca's own phrase right back at him, calling their actions an evil, greedy deed. First, you have the teacher who hasn't reached the spiritual goal and whose disciples simply don't listen to them anyway. The Buddha likens this to a man pursuing someone who pulls away. It's just pointless. Second is the teacher who hasn't reached the goal, but their disciples actually do listen in practice. The Buddha compares this to a farmer neglecting his own field to go weed someone else's. You literally cannot lead someone to a destination you haven't reached yourself. And third, there's the teacher who has attained the goal, but their disciples just won't listen or practice. Again, it's pointless, like cutting an old bond just to tie a new one. All 3 of these scenarios are fully worthy of criticism. So, what does a successful path look like? Let's look at part 4, the path to awakening. So, who is the blameless teacher? Well, it's the fully awakened Buddha, someone who has actually reached the ultimate goal and whose disciples actively listen and succeed. Let's break down the precise step-by-step path these successful disciples take. The very first foundational step is abandoning what are known as the 5 hindrances, which basically block the mind from any real concentration. And the Buddha uses these incredibly relatable metaphors here. He equates covetousness to being burdened by a massive, heavy financial debt. Ill will and anger, that feels exactly like suffering from a painful sickness. Sloth and drowsiness are like being locked away in a prison. Restlessness and anxiety are compared to being bound in slavery. subject to the whims of other people. And finally, uncertainty is like traveling down a highly dangerous, desolate road with your most valuable possessions. Just imagine it. When a disciple finally abandons these mental hindrances, it feels exactly like paying off that crushing debt, or recovering from that terrible sickness, or walking out of prison. The relief and the joy are just immense.
With the mind finally cleared of those hindrances, the disciple enters the jhanas, which are these incredibly deep states of meditative absorption. First up is the first jhana. This is characterized by rapture and pleasure born from completely withdrawing from sensuality. The Buddha describes this state using a really specific simile. It is like a skilled bathman mixing bath powder with water. The mind becomes a ball of powder perfectly kneaded, completely saturated and moisture-laden with pleasure, but crucially, not dripping. Every single part of the body is totally pervaded by this joy. Progressing further, the mind quiets down even more in the second jhana. All that active, chattering thinking stops, leading to a profound unification of awareness and an incredible internal assurance. And notice the calming progression of the water imagery here. Instead of mixing water into powder, the mind is now like a deep lake with cool spring water constantly welling up from within, nourished by abundant showers. The joy and pleasure aren't coming from an outside source anymore. They just well up naturally from the deep depths of a composed mind. In the third jhana, that intense, bubbling rapture actually fades away, leaving a state of equanimous, mindful, and just incredibly pleasant abiding. The stillness really deepens here. The Buddha illustrates this perfectly with the image of a lotus pond. Imagine lotuses that never even break the surface of the water. They stay entirely submerged, completely infused and permeated with cool water from their roots all the way to their tips. The mind is entirely steeped in this quiet, tranquil pleasure. Finally, we reach the fourth jhana. At this stage, even the concepts of pleasure and pain are completely abandoned. What remains is the absolute purity of equanimity and mindfulness. And the metaphor shifts to something really stark and clean. It's like a man sitting completely covered from head to foot with a pure white cloth. There is no part of his body left uncovered. The mind is entirely enveloped in a pure, bright, impenetrable awareness. When a teacher can guide a student all the way to this level of mastery, the Buddha says, that teacher is entirely beyond criticism.
Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, Achieving Ultimate Release. Now that the disciple's mind is concentrated, purified, incredibly bright, and steady, what actually happens next? Well, the text explains that the mind can now be directed towards some truly astonishing capabilities and ultimate realizations. The list of powers that arise from this perfectly purified mind is pretty breathtaking. The disciple gains deep insight, clearly discerning the exact relationship between the physical body and consciousness. But it goes way beyond just insight. The text describes creating a mind-made body, which is essentially extracting a duplicate form from yourself, kind of like pulling a sword from a scabbard. The disciple can wield supernormal powers. We're talking walking on water, flying cross-legged through the air, even touching the sun and the moon. They develop clairaudience, or a divine ear, to hear sounds across different realms. They can read the exact emotional and mental states of others. They can vividly recollect thousands of their own past lives, and clearly see the cosmic cycle of other beings passing away and being reborn, according to their karma, or karma. But here is the kicker. All of those incredible powers, they are just byproducts. The crucial point, the ultimate goal of all of this, is the final realization, the ending of the mental fermentations. The disciple directs this incredibly bright mind to discern stress, the origin of stress, the complete cessation of stress, and the exact path leading to that cessation. The heart is fully released from sensuality, becoming, and ignorance. The disciple knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that the cycle of birth is ended, the holy life is fulfilled, and the task is finally done. This is the ultimate goal. Now, hearing this magnificent step-by-step path to liberation, Lohicca is absolutely blown away, and his reaction brilliantly illustrates his total transformation. He abandons his selfish philosophy right then and there. He says to the Buddha, "It's as if a man, having seized by the hair another man who was falling into the pit of hell, were to pull him up and set him on firm ground." Lohicca realizes that his so-called evil viewpoint of hoarding knowledge was literally dragging him down to hell, and the Buddha, by simply choosing to share his teaching and engage in this debate, literally saved him. The Lohicca Sutta shows us that true wisdom isn't meant to be locked away in a vault. It demands to be shared, even if it's incredibly difficult, because withholding it is the ultimate act of animosity. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. If you uncovered the absolute ultimate truth to completely liberate the human mind, if you literally held the keys to ending all stress and suffering, would you take on the immense, often frustrating burden of sharing it with the world? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and most importantly, keep sharing what you know.